This week on Capitol Journal, Attorney General Steve Marshall offers an update on where death penalty executions stand in Alabama. We'll take you there. A state panel recommends reauthorizing and revising Alabama's economic development incentives. We have the details. Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth joins us to discuss those economic development incentives and what we can expect in the next legislative session. Newly selected president of the Business Council of Alabama, Helena Duncan, sits down for her first interview since taking the helm at BCA. Sonny Brasfield of the Association of County Commissions discusses their big gathering this week. And Robbie McGhee and Arthur Mothershed of the Poarch Band of Creek Indians talk about the recent documentary about their tribe, plus the latest with gambling in Alabama. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. Leading the news this week was Attorney General Steve Marshall, who called a news conference to address the ongoing situation with the Alabama Department of Corrections carrying out death sentences via lethal injection. Governor Kay Ivey last week ordered a top-to-bottom review of the state's capital punishment protocol after an unprecedented third failed lethal injection. Ivey also asked Marshall not to seek additional execution dates for any other death row inmates until that review is complete. Marshall, however, made it clear that there is no moratorium on executions and called for that review to happen quickly. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has the full story.
Attorney General Steve Marshall has concerns about the state of capital punishment in Alabama.
And I have likewise heard victim stories after that verdict about how the delay in the implementation of the death sentence impacts them for years to come.
This after the last 3 executions in Alabama made state and national news for mishaps and cancellations.
Insofar as I in my office are concerned, there is no moratorium, nor will there be, on capital punishment in Alabama.
Marshall points out the case of death row inmate Kenneth Smith.
What occurred on November 17th was a travesty, but not for the reasons that many death penalty opponents and death row sympathizers would have the public to believe. It was a travesty of justice not for Kenny Smith, the twice convicted murderer who was scheduled to be executed that day, but it was for Elizabeth Sennett and for the members of her family.
Alabama's last 3 scheduled executions are serving as a center point for a discussion on capital punishment and the death penalty in this state. The Attorney General wants to clear up the air on this topic by bringing some clarity to this dialogue.
And the clear record is that the delay relating to these executions lies at the feet of the inmates and their lawyers and not the state of Alabama.
Attorney General Marshall says there's an order to the decisions concerning executions in the state.
For the last few weeks, I've seen some pronouncements that somehow or another we have a so-called moratorium on executions in Alabama. And I will tell you that that characterization came as a great surprise to me, because there's only 2 parties involved in setting an execution in Alabama. That's me as Attorney General and our Alabama Supreme Court.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
We've been following the process by which state leaders are going about renewing and revising Alabama's economic development incentive laws. The Alabama Jobs Act and the Growing Alabama Act are set to expire next year, which is by design and able to force lawmakers to update the statutes to reflect current needs. Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth is leading the commission charged with recommending what changes are needed to make Alabama more competitive. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith has that story.
On March 7th, when Alabama lawmakers return to the Alabama State House, one of their top priorities will be renewing the economic development incentives. The key findings and recommendations from the Joint Legislative Study Commission on Economic Development Incentives will be the framework for the legislation they propose.
This work's really important. It's going to help kind of tee up the legislative leadership and the legislature when they come in to take on the issues of continued job growth and investment in our state.
At the Commission's last meeting, they unanimously approved multiple recommendations. Included in reauthorizing the Alabama Jobs Act and Growing Alabama Act is to revise the calculation of the Jobs Act statutory cap.
Current cap is $350 million. The recommendations increase the cap to be determined in the future amount based on input from the executive and legislative leadership.
That cap is an important issue because in its wisdom, the legislature decided that we needed to have a measurable system to make certain that we have a cap, a limit on the maximum amount that we can use for incentives, to make sure to give a period of time where the incentives can be evaluated. That's exactly what this committee did. They evaluated the success of the incentives. I think the findings speak for themselves. Positive net returns, new revenues flowing into the state, new jobs being created for Alabamians.
Even with the billions generated for Alabama and the thousands of jobs the incentives have created, State Senator Bobby Singleton wants to ensure the return on investment is not compromised.
I'm hoping the thought in there was about the balance. So as we talk, I got that from people that we were looking at how do we make that balance and get the best return for the dollars. But I just want to make sure, I just want to make that statement that it's always that concern in the back of my head, how are we making this return and how we're going to make it best for our children in the state of Alabama.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when you look at obviously, how well Alabama's economy is doing and the growth we've seen in the ETF. I'm encouraged by Alabama. I'm bullish on our economy and what our Department of Commerce is doing and the industries coming in here, and I think that's only going to continue to grow. But I agree with you 100% on got to make sure our kids are our future.
The ETF is the Education Trust Fund. Canfield notes that the committee has taken a broad look at economic growth by considering other issues, such as increasing the number of mega sites, being more transparent with the public on the incentives' effectiveness, and creating more opportunities for small business, especially those owned by veterans, women, and minorities. For Capital Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
And I'll speak with Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth more on this issue later in the show. House Speaker-designate Nathaniel Ledbetter announced more House committee chairs this week. Representative Randall Shedd of Fairview will chair the Transportation, Utilities, and Infrastructure Committee. He will replace Lynn Greer, who did not seek re-election this year. Representative Danny Crawford of Athens will keep his spot as chairman of the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee. Representative Jim Carnes of Vestavia Hills will chair the Commerce and Small Business Committee. Representative Margie Wilcox of Mobile will chair the Boards, Agencies, and Commissions Committee. That's what's responsible for overseeing and reviewing about 100 occupational license boards. And Representative Reed Ingram of Montgomery will keep his chairmanship of the County and Municipal Government Committee for the next term. Lawmakers will meet for the organizational session on January 10th, and then later for the regular session beginning March 7th. An update on a story we reported last week involving former state representative Perry Hooper, who was charged with 1 count of sexual abuse after being arrested for groping a woman at a downtown Montgomery restaurant. Those charges have now been dropped after the victim, Elizabeth Daly, asked prosecutors not to pursue the case and asked Hooper to make a public apology. He did just that this week, saying, quote, "I would like to express my sincerest apologies to Elizabeth Daly. I was wrong. I take full responsibility for my actions. Ms. Daly is an exemplary person, and my behavior was unacceptable." End quote. On the education front, the Alabama STEM Council announced it will direct an initial $4.5 million to launch 4 new STEM teacher preparation and recruitment programs at Alabama colleges. The You Teach initiative was developed more than a decade ago at the University of Texas in Austin to identify science and math majors and introduce them to opportunities in education after college. The council is launching the initiative at Alabama A&M, Auburn, Auburn-Montgomery, Athens State, the University of South Alabama, and the University of West Alabama. UAB will also receive funding to expand its existing UAB Teach program. When fully implemented, the You Teach programs are expected to produce 250 STEM educators per year. Some changes coming to the cabinet. Governor Kay Ivey announced that Alcohol Beverage Control Administrator Matt Gibson will retire at the end of the year after more than 12 years in that role. Curtis Stewart is Ivey's choice to assume leadership of the ABC board starting in January. Stewart is the current Deputy Commissioner at the Alabama Department of Revenue, where he's been for 10 years. The ABC administrator oversees the agency's central office and warehouse and more than 170 ABC stores and about 875 employees statewide. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Next, I'm joined by Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth. Governor, thanks for coming on Capital Journal.
Hey, Todd, always great to be on. So how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. We're just making it through another week. But speaking of this week, you were busy in the State House this week with this meeting on economic development incentives. I really wanted to ask you about this because this commission that you had, it's had a couple of meetings now, but this one, the commission made some recommendations on renewing the economic development incentives that we have, making some revisions as well. Can you kind of walk me through what happened?
Yeah, I mean, so the first, those two are our main, big incentives for the state, and they expire, this coming summer. So, we got tasked with the legislature, had a bipartisan commission, had members from the private sector as well as government. And first, I want to thank just the commission for their work. It's been a lot of hard work. It's been months of looking into this, and really proud of the product we put together and the recommendations to reauthorize our incentives, and it shows that they're working. We have tweaks and modifications that we've recommended, but really proud of just the Department of Commerce, the governor's office, and what our state's doing in economic development. If you look at it, last year we had close to 15-16% growth in the ETF. For so long everybody talked about how our population was going to decline. We might lose a congressional seat. Turns out our population grew in Alabama, right? People are flocking here. Businesses are moving here. And the incentives we have are a key part of that. But, what this process has taught me is that Alabama has some of the best incentives, and we're also getting a great return on that as well.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the talk revolved around this cap that we have, right? The monetary cap that I guess is about $300 million of money that we can be leveraging at one time.
That's right.
But I've also heard talk about, the incentives that we use. They're not like they were 10, 15 years ago when we borrowed a lot of money. This is pay as you go, meaning we're not exactly, taking out a loan to get this money. So I've also heard talk that maybe the cap should be eliminated. Is there any consideration there you think the legislature might give it?
Yeah, so one of the recommendations we had is that we suggested that the cap be increased, and personally, my personal opinion is that it needs to be increased to $500 million, right?
Okay.
And I think, why right now we're losing potential, companies that are wanting to come here, because at the end of the day, Alabama competes against who? Other states, right? And so if we're competing against other states and we're already at the cap and we're not able to continue to go after other companies, we're potentially losing other industries that want to come here. And so, in that situation, I guess we're almost a victim of our own success, and we've been very successful, and the companies are locating here, and we're using that up. But not only do we need to raise it, but then also you got to ask, what type of return are we getting on that? And it's really good. Almost $1.6 for every dollar we spend is a return going back to the ETF. And so, not only, so it's not corporate welfare. We're not giving this money out. This is actually incentivizing companies to pay. And to your point, pay as you go. And so they're going to use it as long as they provide jobs. And then when they do that, the return the state's getting is a great return. And that's why you're seeing so much growth in our state from a budget standpoint.
Also heard y'all talk about transparency in the process and maybe recommending to the legislature to put some more guardrails on there in terms of transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in government, I'm a big believer in being transparent, letting the light shine on everything. And so our recommendation was, when there's an incentive that's given out, we want real time to know, what's going on there, when, how is the company doing on, requesting the incentives they're going to need, and Department of Commerce is going to provide that information.
Another interesting takeaway I had from the meeting was the brownfields situation where, as you mentioned, victim of our own success, a lot of our mega sites are already taken up, right? And so maybe creating new mega sites where we can, recruit this industry, including maybe sites that were previously used for industry, these brownfields that can be reclaimed. There was a lot of discussion about that, which I thought was novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you look at, brownfields, you look at mega sites, and for the viewers out there that maybe don't know what mega sites are, that's 1,000-acre plus sites, right? And so when economic developers, companies are looking, what's happened in Alabama is we don't have many of those sites available. And so what we've got to do is make sure that, we continue to put more money into developing that and be forward thinking, because we know we're going to continue to have industry come here. I mean, Huntsville is, the rocket capital of the world. We got Space Command coming here. You look at what's going on in Birmingham with the growth there, Auburn, Alabama, and Tuscaloosa, down in Mobile, right? It's booming. Baldwin County is our fastest growing county. Wiregrass, I was there, and a lot of exciting things. So all across the state, we have tremendous growth. Problem is we don't have enough economic development sites. And so, that's where making sure we put more money into growing, to having additional sites is going to be very beneficial. And I think one of the things we don't do always well in government, sometimes we react. And so I think the fact that we're being, actually looking to the future and is going to be huge for our state.
This is an interesting issue at this moment, economic development and incentives, because there are some groups out there that are kind of starting to stir the pot about this. Calling it corporate welfare, as you mentioned. Alabama is not unilateral in this environment. There are other states that also have programs. So how do you respond when when groups do call it corporate welfare and challenge the even existence of incentives?
Yeah, I mean, so if all the states didn't have economic development, they didn't have incentives, then of course we wouldn't have to do it. But at the end of the day, Alabama is competing against every other state, and so our goal in this commission was to look at what other the other states, what they had for incentives. How do we compare? It's real important to me, what return are we getting, because this funds our education and our students, which is the future. And so I would say that it's wise to make sure that we're doing a good job on recruiting these industries. We want our kids to have 21st century, great paying jobs, and we want the best companies located here in Alabama. So anybody that says otherwise, I think is just don't really understand what they're talking about, and they don't understand how economic development works.
You mentioned education. I was going to ask you about this next, because throughout this election cycle, a lot of candidates, yourself included, but the governor, go down the list of legislative candidates, you heard a lot of talk about improving education. I think a lot of it stemmed from those disappointing NAEP scores 4 years ago or 2 years ago. Had some better scores this time around, at least in the lower grades, that maybe showed some progress. But everybody talks about improving education, and I would also add workforce to that, because it's kind of part of the same problem. So what do you think we might see legislatively, proposal-wise, from your office, from the governor, to improve education here in the next term?
Yeah, I think first, you hear a lot of chatter, and something I'm certainly supportive of, school choice, right? And why does that matter, right? I mean, you've got students that have been in historically failing schools. You've got, look at Montgomery, right here, state's capital, you've got a lot of failing schools. Those students are trapped. And so to give them an opportunity to go to potentially a private school, wow, I mean, that would be a lifeline for those students. You look at areas, we need to potentially look at charter schools in some areas. That's historically has worked in a lot of places. But it boils down to having competition. And when you do that, and also giving parents choice on what is the best option to send their child, I think if we can do that, it's not going to be the only solution, but I think it's 10 to 20%, of solving the problem in Alabama. I think continuing to encourage people to go into education, having better pay to attract, more teachers is something we've really got to continue to look at. I think another interesting thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about really for the most part, but I found this out in some surveys I was looking at, was that a lot of our students, especially in our poorer counties, the number one issue these students face, and this comes from surveys that were taken, is they're hungry, right? And so and they go home hungry. And so I think we really got to address, the situation of how do we make sure these students have proper nutrition, because they're struggling there, they're certainly going to struggle in school. And so that was something interesting I just found out about in the last month that was concerning to me, because that's just something I just take for granted, right? I mean, that everybody's getting fed. And so, I mean,
you can't much learn if you're hungry, right?
Yeah. And so I think that's something in our poor counties we really got to look at, is what can we do to help those kids when they leave school? Obviously, they're getting a good meal at school. And, there's different ministries out there, Blessings in a Backpack, I think of, and, my home county in Marshall County, where they send food home with children. But it's a big problem. And it surprised me in this survey that was the number one issue that these kids, said that some of them were dealing with was hunger was the number one thing that was a deterrent to learning.
Well, it's interesting the way you talk about education. It reminds me, we had Nathaniel Ledbetter on here, the next Speaker of the House, and he kind of said, when it comes to education, it's not going to be one silver bullet. It will be a lot of different levers that you pull and everything. And you mentioned Montgomery. We did some reporting on this conversion charter school that they're doing. It's a charter school, but they're taking over an existing school and having a lot of success. And there's a lot of talk about how maybe that could be replicated in other parts of the state. But I know you also, in your office, have been focusing on military and veterans, making Alabama a more hospitable state for military families, for veterans. Talk about the latest with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so our goal is to try to make Alabama the most veteran and military-friendly state in the country. And, we passed 22 bills in the last, 4 years. We've got 4 or 5 bills on the docket for the next session that Jess Skaggs, that does a great job as our chief of staff, has been working with our military leaders in this state. But I was really proud of the fact that a survey came out, and it said it ranked Alabama as the number 2 state in the country for veterans. Number 1 was Florida, so we got to figure out what they're doing better than us to move to number 1, because our goal is to be number 1 for veterans and number 1 for military families. But at the end of the day, it boils down to this, we don't have a freedom, we don't have country, we don't have a state if it wasn't for our military families and our veterans. And so we certainly owe a great, debt of gratitude to them. And so it's a huge honor to get to represent them and to make sure that we make their quality of life the best it can be.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears real quick, let's talk about aerospace and aviation. I know that your office has a lot to do with the state's efforts in aerospace and aviation. It's been a booming industry in Alabama, not just from the government standpoint with Redstone Arsenal and all that's going on there, but also private sector. So where would you say we are, and where are we headed in terms of aerospace?
Yeah, I think Alabama's the aerospace capital of the world. I think when you look at just aerospace defense, the amount of money that's going to come in from the federal government, we're in a really good spot. And I would say, that's also a great industry to be in during a recession, because you've got to continue to have defense. We're going to continue to make sure we protect our assets in space. There's more PhDs and engineers per capita in Huntsville than anywhere in the world. And the companies that are growing there and the technology, we ought to be really proud of what's going on in Alabama. And the reason we got Space Command in Alabama is because of merit, not politics. And I've said this before, we were only deficient in 4 areas. One of those was licensed reciprocity, which guess what? We fixed in Alabama through these bills. So now we're only deficient in 3. The next closest state was Colorado. They were deficient in 10. So they can cry and say it was politics, but at the end of the day, they didn't get it because, they didn't produce as good a product as the state of Alabama. And so we're going to continue to be the aerospace capital. I think there'll be a lot of growth there.
So and you're confident that decision is going to stand?
I feel good. I mean, the 2 independent reports I've seen have verified that Alabama is the right choice, and my understanding is they're getting ready to make another announcement on that.
Okay, interesting. Well, look, we're out of an election cycle, so maybe the dust from the election is settled, but it's never too early to talk about the next one. You've run twice now for lieutenant governor successfully. Kay Ivey's term limited. Should we be expecting you to seek that top job next time around?
So I'll say this. First, I want to thank the voters of Alabama for electing us again, to a second term as lieutenant governor, and honored both elections. I don't know if you know this or not. We got the most votes of anyone in the state that had an opponent. So we're certainly proud of that. Our goal is this. We want to work hard over the next 4 years to continue to, work on military issues, work on education issues, work on workforce development, make sure we solve issues that matter to people, economic development, bring in jobs here. And then I think at the end of the day, I've told people this before, I don't have a desire to go to D.C. So certainly the only other office I would run for in the state's governor. And we'll see in 4 years kind of if that's, what we're looking at doing. I think right now my plan's to work with the leaders we've got. Excited about Governor Ivey being there. Excited about Pro Tem Reed, Speaker Ledbetter. And we're going to make sure that we continue to have the business climate and continue to work on things to make Alabama the best place to, live and play.
Well, as they say, 4 years is an eternity in politics, but it also goes very quickly.
It does. Flies by.
So we'll be watching. But thanks again for coming on Capitol Journal.
Hey, thank you. Always a pleasure.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Montgomery native Catherine C. Thornton is a physicist and former NASA astronaut. A veteran of 4 space flights, Thornton has logged over 975 hours in space, including more than 21 hours of extravehicular activity. During her time with NASA, she served on the crew of STS-49, the maiden flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour, helped repair the Hubble Space Telescope, and conducted microgravity experiments in Spacelab.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm joined by Helena Duncan, President and CEO of the Business Council of Alabama. Helena, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
And I guess congratulations.
Yes.
You are the new permanent president and CEO of BCA. I guess that announcement was just last week.
Yes, it was done on Thursday.
Well, congratulations. Can you share with our viewers maybe a little more about your background and how you came to be at BCA?
Absolutely. I have a long history here in Montgomery as a businesswoman. I have over 30 years in the financial industry. My previous job prior to joining BCA, I was president and CEO of the Region for Liberty Bank and Trust. I joined BCA in 2020 as their Director of Strategic Operation and Growth, and then I was promoted there as Senior Vice President of Operations and Investor Relations. I have sat on numerous of boards here in Montgomery. I've served as chairman of St. James School, where my children attended. I also was a member of the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, their Committee of 100, their Board of Governance for the Committee of 100. I am currently serving on the Board of Directors for Dixie Electric. I am also on Synova's board as well as the YMCA.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, BCA has had temporary leadership for the last year and a half because when Katie Britt, the previous CEO, she stepped down to run for Senate. Yes. And was successful at that, obviously. But when that happened, Robin Stone stepped in as interim president or interim director. But now you're the permanent leader. Mm-hmm. So how is that going to be different? Is having that permanency kind of help y'all make solid and substantive plans for the future?
Absolutely. We were very fortunate to get Robin Stone to step in with his many years of experience and leadership around BCA, to step in and help us through our strategic planning for the future for BCA. Although I wasn't aware I was going to be in this role as President CEO, I had the opportunity to learn a lot from Robin. But BCA has been built on its members. Our members' needs has been our top priority, and that will never change. We have a very eager and dedicated staff that works constantly on trying to find ways to serve these members in a more effective way. We have a dedicated leadership team. They have worked over the years to build a strong foundation for BCA, and my goal is just to continue to build on that firm foundation, while we're leaving a positive impact on businesses throughout this state. We will continue to be very pro-business, pro-growth for the Alabama business community, and those things will never change.
Well, speaking of that, a lot of that comes down to advocacy here in the State House. in Washington, but specifically here in the State House. And so it strikes me that organizations like yours, leaders of organizations like yours, the CEOs, sometimes there's a different approach. Some of them say, well, I'm going to be the one in the State House. I'm going to be the one, physically there, kind of taking that role. Others take more of a step back and allow their team, to go to the State House and manage their lobbyists, basically, to go to the State House and manage. I know that you're still very new, but what might your approach be in terms of that advocacy, managing that advocacy?
That's right. So BCA's policies has always been set and driven by our members. We have a very extensive process for the BC policy committees, where we are available to listen to our members, which are the businesses in this state, as we develop policies for our legislative sessions. We have a very strong advocacy group that is led by David Cole, who is one of the best in the business, as you know, and we have total confidence in him doing that. But one thing that I was charged with was developing relationships with all the branches of government. So I will continue to grow relationships that I currently have, as well as develop new ones along the way.
Well, speaking of policies, we are in a period of historically low unemployment here in Alabama, which is great news.
Which is great.
At the same time, we hear about businesses all the time continuing to have trouble finding workers in this economy, right? There's many reasons for it, but in terms of solving that problem, there's a lot of talk from the Ivey administration, some lawmakers here in this building, about in the next year and the next term focusing on improving education, a real re-emphasis on workforce development to make sure that we have the workers to actually fill these jobs. Well, that's what the government's saying. You represent the business community. So what are they saying about workforce development needs?
Our members, that continues to be a top priority for them. That is one of their main concerns that we hear about, and because of that, it's a big concern of ours. So BCA is prepared to work with the governor in whatever capacity that she needs us to help address this issue across our state.
Mm-hmm. And sort of a related issue, here this week they were talking about economic development incentives. These are, the Alabama Jobs Act, the Growing Alabama Act. They might be even named something different next time around. But I guess the key is, with them expiring this year, there's an initiative to reauthorize, maybe revise some of them. But from the business perspective, how important is it that at least the state allow economic incentives to recruit industry?
Well, you can imagine from the business community that is a top priority, but it is our top priority for our legislative agenda for 2023. And we are already having meetings and sitting on committees that will address those issues and doing what we can to help get that passed in 2023. Well,
while I have you, I did hear that, because we're still in this college football season, at least before the bowls, I heard that you have a son that plays college football. Is that right?
Absolutely. My youngest son, both of my sons played college football. My oldest played at Vanderbilt and went on to sign with the Cardinals. But once he was released, he's now serving in the governmental affairs arena in Tennessee.
Oh, really?
But my youngest son is currently playing for Mississippi State right now, and he's a senior. He's a 3-year starter there for Mississippi State. He's a safety, and he's going to play his last game on January 2nd in the bowl game.
Well, how about that?
Yes.
So football and governmental affairs runs in the family.
It runs in our family, yes.
Well, look, congratulations again. That's
Yes.
a premier job here in Montgomery, and best wishes, and thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you for having me, Todd. Yes.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capitol Journal.
County commissioners from around the state gathered in Montgomery this week for the annual meeting of the Association of County Commissions. Joining me now is Sonny Brasfield, Executive Director of that organization. Sonny, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Good to see you.
I know it's been a busy week for you. I guess it's a 3-day conference.
Yeah, the legislative conference was only one afternoon and the next day. We also have an orientation for brand new commissioners. There are 45 newly elected commissioners who took office in the middle of November, and so we had those men and women in Montgomery as well to tell them a little bit about what they've gotten themselves into.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure that's important. Well, I was pleased to be a part of it, speaking for just a little bit about a kind of a legislative update. And the one thing I noticed when I was speaking was when I brought up ARPA. You know, we have the second round of ARPA money the legislature is going to deal with, next time when the session starts. And I saw heads come up and eyes get wide and nodding, because obviously counties really care about this situation. What is the conversation surrounding ARPA for this second round of money?
Sure. In the end, counties will get, in the neighborhood of $1 billion. And so that's why the heads move up, especially in the smaller counties where their opportunity to get federal funds to do what we call transformative projects, really, those are very few and far between. The association actually stood up a program. We are working on a daily basis with 41 counties to help them administer their projects effectively, identify activities and projects and eligible expenditures that can really make a difference at the local level, helping them with compliance, record keeping, that kind of thing. Every county in Alabama has already downloaded, much as the state has, the second allocation. We actually have an investment program for the counties that the legislature approved for us last session, and counties are able to invest that money right now and are making about 4%, and that's additional money they can use to make important improvements at the local level.
Well, looking toward the next legislative session, it's not until March, but I keep telling people it'll be here before you know it.
It's here already.
Right. Well, what is going to be on your legislative agenda representing, you like to say, 67 counties, one voice?
That's right. Well, a couple of things. Our folks have increasingly been concerned about a number of issues that relate to the Board of Registrars, and of course we saw that in a couple of legislative races where we had a difficult time getting the lines for districts adjusted properly. And so we plan to bring some legislation to try to improve and enhance the Board of Registrars process at the local level, make sure they're open whenever the courthouse is open, try to have the appointments be a little more reflective of the community. Most citizens probably don't know that the 3-member Board of Registrars panel is appointed by the governor, the state auditor, and the state ag commissioner. It's a process that survives back way before you and I were born, back in about 1920.
Yeah, so, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we are. There are a couple of other election issues. We'd like to shift to electronic advertising of the ballot information and those kinds of things. We still do that by newspaper, and in 2023 we don't reach the public using that methodology, and so we'd like to make a shift there as well. And we're going to spend, we hope, some time with the legislature talking about perhaps shifting our broadband incentive process a little. We'd like to also have an element that would allow county and city leaders to identify priority local projects and then use state money and now local money, because of a constitutional amendment that passed, to try to incentivize companies to provide the service in places that are a priority because of the local leadership identifying those areas. Right now, our state program is driven by applications that can be filed only by the broadband companies, and we think that would really help the public.
And is that possible now because of the constitutional amendment that just passed?
That's right. Not to get down in the weeds too far, but the Constitution of Alabama prohibits counties and cities from giving what the Constitution calls a thing of value to a person or an entity. And so the voters overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment in November specifically allowing the use of public funds for broadband expansion, which we know is probably the most important issue facing Alabama right now.
Yeah, I mean, just about every interview it comes up in one way or another, from education to healthcare, it's into the county commissions. So.
That's right. Quality of life,
Right.
Economic recruitment. Without it, there was a day when the most important thing was where are the roads. That's not so important anymore.
No. Well, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on Capital Journal.
Thanks very much.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Alabama Public Television recently aired a documentary titled The Forgotten Creeks, which recalls the history of Alabama's Creek Indians, from Spanish contact in the 1500s to the Indian Removal Act of 1830 to the Poarch Creek's modern-day success story. Here's a clip.
There are civilizations that didn't stand the test of time. They died out. Our people walked this land far before anybody ever touched it.
Of the over 560 federally recognized tribes in North America, no two are exactly the same.
Andrew Jackson was elected president in 1829. The following year, the Congress passes the Indian Removal Act, which Jackson signed.
A forced march from the southeast to new lands in present-day Oklahoma.
Both my grandmothers did not get their GED until they were in their 50s. Think about the struggles they had growing up, that they were not allowed to go to school.
I think it made you feel like you were inferior. To me, it did for me, that you were lesser.
Culture is not just language and it's not just history, but it's also a way of being.
Was it good to be Native American? No, it wasn't.
But you got to show document throughout time that you've been here, that you've had leadership, that you've had property, that you've done all the things as a tribal group of people.
Don't give up. We believe in you. You believe in you.
For a long time, we were made to feel bad, but now everybody wants to be Indian now.
When you belong to something, you hold it dear to your heart. And when it belongs to you, you don't want to let go of it.
And joining me now in studio from the Poarch Band of Creek Indians are Vice Chairman Robbie McGhee and Board Member Arthur Mothershed. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, I watched the documentary. It was really interesting. I learned a lot. Tell me how this kind of came about and y'all's involvement.
I think it was, we're excited that I was able to do it. Alabama Public Television came to us, and it's been about a year and a half ago, and said they have the opportunity, I believe it is, to choose two type of documentaries that they actually will, fund and do within the state of Alabama. And after some discussion and things like that, they came to us and said we need to do one on the Poarch Band of Creek Indians. Mm-hmm. And of course, at first you're a little bit hesitant. What do you need from us? What is this gonna, how's this gonna impact the tribe and things like that? And after working with them and trying to get everybody involved on the same page, I have to admit, I think it was a great experience. But it was also something that I think tells a great story, mm-hmm. and one that we're proud of.
Well, I'm curious, have y'all gotten any feedback from folks that watched the documentary that maybe didn't before know much about the history there? Did y'all get any feedback?
I can speak to two calls that one was a text. I think it was the second time it aired, mm-hmm. and from someone who I sit on a board with here in Montgomery actually, and said, I'm in tears, just because I think this is an amazing documentary and I wasn't aware of this, and I'm just, I want to say that thank you for sharing it. And then there was another one was a legislator that said after I watched it and I sent it to everyone in my family and said, I need you to watch this before, at least before Thanksgiving and such.
Well, that's really interesting, and and it is online. We'll post the video online on aptv.org. But it ends, like you said, with the success story. That's the words that they use, and it is quite obviously a success story because the Poarch Creeks now have very successful business ventures, most notably in the casino industry. I understand, Arthur, you're in the business development end at PCI. How's that going? I know y'all are in the business of acquiring casinos in several states.
Well, that's true. We've been very successful with our core properties here in Alabama, and they've been very successful with us. But several years ago, we did realize, hey, we want to continue to grow and expand our footprint. We had to look outside the boundaries of the state, although we do continue to work with the state about other opportunities. So, early 2013, I guess, we partnered actually with a couple of tribes on some small ventures, and then we started moving into more commercial operations in 2015-16. Actually closed on our first commercial operation in 2017, and it just so happened to not be in the United States, but in the Caribbean, in Aruba. And then we shortly thereafter closed on a second property in Curacao, which is part of the ABC Islands. A couple of years later, we heard that the Sands Bethlehem was on the market. We took a look, and that's been our biggest acquisition to date, was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Sands Bethlehem, which is now Wind Creek Bethlehem. Since then, we were involved in a licensing bid for a casino in the Southlands of Chicago. It's two villages, East Hazelcrest and Homewood, and we won that bid. I guess it's been about 8 months now. We're starting construction there and hoping to have that casino open in 2024. And we continue to look both internationally and domestically for other opportunities.
Interesting. Well, here in Alabama, it's no secret gambling can be a touchy subject. Really, that's always been the case, I think. So the most recent things that are going on is the Attorney General, Steve Marshall, recently won the Supreme Court victory that he believes is going to allow him to close down these dog track casinos, Victoryland, Whitehall, Green Track, and the rest. We'll see how that plays out. But the Indian casinos are different, right? Federally regulated. I was hoping that you could kind of explain that difference, your legal standing versus the dog tracks.
The best way to do it is, as you pointed out, is because we follow federal law. And there is the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act of 1988 that was passed that says that this is how gaming can be done on lands that have been held in trust for Native Americans. And so the current properties that we have are on trust lands. And that allows us to do the federal definition of what gaming is. And so here in the state of Alabama, we do have a bingo definition. Now that bingo definition is a traditional definition of bingo. However, the federal law differs and says, yes, the tribe can do bingo, but they can also do it in this form, in these various forms. What's the difference between, say, federal law on this issue and compared to state law? There are constitutional amendments out there that do allow for bingo within the state of Alabama. And what has come to be now is to say, okay, what does that bingo look like, and what is what is taking place? Not only, we can't just pigeonhole the tracks. You have to. It's happening, throughout in places that don't even have the constitutional amendments. And
I think Etowah County the other day had a raid.
Yeah, and you have places in Birmingham and things like that. And so you have to look at it like, what is the constitutional amendment for them to do what they are doing, if there is one, and are they following that? And I think that's been the question, and I think that's what the Attorney General is trying to determine.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, look, I went through the gambling wars, the bingo wars back in the early mid-2000s. There's always talk of gambling legislation every time the session gets close. It'll be here in March, but it's an annual thing. Is there going to be a gambling bill? They got pretty close last year, 2021, I think was the year, and this was the big sort of expansive bill from Del Marsh with obviously casinos, but I think y'all were involved in terms of maybe expanding into North Alabama and some things there, but also sports betting and the lotteries. It was the big expansive bill. Got really close toward the end, just didn't kind of run out of time in the House. Let me ask you, looking to this new term, many new lawmakers, do you expect to see another bill like that, all expansive, in this new legislature?
Hope so. At least our intent would be to continue to push for a comprehensive gaming bill. I mean, the governor herself did a study, I guess, was it 19, 20?
Mm-hmm.
Might have been 20, because it seems like we had to do everything remote, so it probably was during COVID. And, it just shows that a comprehensive gaming bill would bring, according to whose estimates you look at, somewhere between $500 and $700 million a year into the state's coffers. And, that's notwithstanding the initial license fees that would be out there. So we think it's in the state's best interest to take advantage of the monies that are on the table. As Rob just pointed out, there's gaming going on in the state. We're obviously doing it. There are other facilities doing it. And the state should capitalize on that instead of ignoring it and pushing it down the road.
Sure. So my understanding is that bill would have allowed like table games, because right now you just have the machines, right? It's not,
we follow the definition of electronic bingo.
Right. So, I mean, if next year you suddenly were allowed to have table games, does that increase your business because more people are interested in coming and things like that? Is that good for business or what?
I think what you have to look at it from, so what that bill did was it provided the opportunity for casino-style gaming to everybody that was listed within the bill. So it wasn't just the tribe. The tribe would fall under, our 3 locations would fall under the compact negotiations.
Okay, yeah.
And so what would occur then is, like, if you provided us, and we call it within the federal realm, Class 3 gaming, then we could pay revenue off of some of the off of those games to the state, because you're giving us something in return. And that's what we were thinking about from that exchange, also having the Northeast property. Because since you're going to give gaming to all the other entities that were in that bill, then what do we actually get? And so we said, well, we need, we will look at the Northeast property, and then a commercial property, and pay whatever the tax is within the legislation. Mm-hmm. And so because we already have, people forget too, we own the Mobile Greyhound track. We're partners within the Mobile Greyhound track.
Okay.
And so you had the other tracks, us, and then the only other, would be the, as I pointed out, just the compact for the 3 sites that we have within the state.
So even if there wasn't legislation, are y'all still interested in a compact with the state? Because I think the governor can just negotiate that on her own.
I think that what we've run into is you have different interpretations. Does the governor have the power? Within federal law, it clearly states that the governor has the ability to negotiate a compact with the tribe. I think there has been some arguments. Does she have the ability to do that?
Okay.
Because of the scope of the Constitution, and you are taking gaming and expanding it, the definition of itself. Now, some believe that we only just need to provide the governor enabling legislation, saying. Directing the governor to negotiate a compact. So it's really a fine line. I believe that she does, but there's probably Arthur may believe differently.
I believe that she does. I just don't know that her or any other governor would be willing to take that risk, because there's a question out there. I mean, there's different interpretations of the law, and it's different in each state and how it's applied. So I do think the risk is for the governor, the sitting governor, and previous governors has been, if I do it, is it going to get overturned? Is it going to get challenged? And if so, why not just go the legislative route?
Yep. Switching gears real quick. I understand that y'all had the big powwow on Thanksgiving Day down in Atmore. I think we may have some photos of this. Tell me about this. Tell me the history and what happened.
Well, I think, hopefully if you have a lot of the individuals go and watch that documentary, The Forgotten Creeks, it talks about, this gathering that we started, and this was our 50th powwow, and that's why it was special. Of course, now we
should have been 52.
Thank you. Yeah, because of COVID, we didn't have it a couple of years and such, and so it was just a homecoming. It was one of those things, especially having the opportunity to bring a lot of tribal members home, a lot of their families, but then a lot of Native Americans from across the United States that were coming out and doing very competition-style dancing. You had drummers. I think we had I want to say 6 drum groups that were from all over the U.S. that were coming and doing competitive drumming and such. And roughly, we're looking at 10 to 12,000 people that participated in Thanksgiving Day, the Thursday, and the Friday following. It happens every year, and hopefully it will continue I think we've put COVID behind us, and going forward. So next year we should have completed a pavilion.
Yeah.
So now it's going to be covered, and before it's just been out in the elements and such.
Okay.
So it's pretty exciting.
How many people?
We believe, we haven't got the official count, but 10 to 12,000 people.
Wow.
Attended.
It's going to be a big pavilion to cover.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Well, that's cool. Well, look, I really appreciate y'all's time and driving up from Mattmore to do this interview. But thanks again for coming on Capitol Journal.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
From its establishment in 1969 by the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section, also known as the Swampers, until the mid-1980s, the Muscle Shoals Sound Studios in Sheffield, Colbert County was one of the most sought-after recording studios in the nation. Muscle Shoals played a prominent role in American popular music, both as a production facility and as a stylistic embodiment of Southern regional music. The studio also held a unique place in the narrative of soul music in the early 1970s. From the Rolling Stones to Aretha Franklin, performers who recorded at the studio represent some of the most notable and popular recording artists of the time. The remarkable consistency of the music created by the Swampers is a testament to the synergy of the players and their dedication to the art of recording. The studio's legacy, which is internationally recognized, testifies to music's ability to bring people together. Muscle Shoals Sound Studio was placed on the National Register of Historic Places on June 2, 2006.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week, Friday night at 7:30 and Sunday at noon, right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.